Russos brand family. We are family.
Alterna TV.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome to another edition of Alterna TV. As always, I'm your host, Brandon Stransky. Gonna get right to it today because we have a very important subject to go over. The death of WCW. Now, recently, as some of you may have heard on an episode of Castrating the Marks, they had the clip of Brian Alvarez, one of the co-authors of this book, and the one who doesn't have the balls to back up and defend his remarks when the people that he's talking about in this book challenge him and want to meet him face to face. Unlike the other author, R.D. Reynolds, who actually does have a scrotum. Anyway, we're going to go ahead and get started with this. Oh yeah, in that clip, he made the claim of that this book was 99.9% accurate. And in just a couple of chapters, mainly focusing on mostly 99 and 2000, I'm going to basically destroy that claim using facts and evidence. So we're going to start in the epilogue, page 314. This is the original edition, not the revised one. We're going to start in page 314 in the epilogue, down to the last big paragraph where it talks about how WWE dropped the ball on Hogan and Flair in '91 when that went down. But we go a little further down and they talk about this. Okay, yeah, and they end that discussion with this following sentence: "The feud was a bust at the box office compared to what should have been. Here's error number one. Then in 2001, Chris Benoit jumped to the WWF without having lost the WCW title in the ring." First inaccuracy. Benoit did not leave WCW in 2001. He left in 2000. Like, something that small should really make you question. If they can't get something that small correctly, it should make you question the important stuff later on. Gonna keep. So anyway, we're gonna go to 1999. Let's see where we at. I'm selling 2000 crap. Alright, here we go. The first thing, and it's also full of contradictory information as well. Here's the first step. Remember this when we get to 2000. Remember this line. We're talking about Tank Abbott and his signing. "He was charismatic, however, and his occasional knockouts were so vicious that he remained a draw and had some people convinced he was one of the baddest men on the planet." Keep this in mind throughout the rest of this book as you see his name pop up here and there. Oh, trust me, he will pop up again when they contradict themselves with their... Just remember here's the highlighted statement to remember. Just remember this statement about Tank Abbott, what they said about him in this book. "He was charismatic, however, and his occasional knockouts were so vicious that he remained a draw and had some people convinced that he was one of the baddest men on the planet." Remember that when we get to later on. That's something else for later. Alright, here we get to the signing of Russo. They go into a little bit of his background getting hired with the WWF. One sentence that they basically make an assumption of with no proof and no sources to back it up whatsoever. Just an assumption. Maybe I'd be willing to say it might even be an outright lie. Who knows? Eventually, the WWF hired him more to shut him up than anything else. No evidence, no proof, No sources to back this statement up. All pure 100% speculation. Next paragraph. Oh, we're on page 213. Going down to the paragraph where it says, Russo was good. Not at writing wrestling TV, mind you, but at spinning folks into believing that he and his buddy Ed Ferrara, who had also jumped with him, were the sole reason behind WWF's success. I have yet to find any source of that statement coming out of Vince Russo's mouth. I have heard plenty of interviews. I have seen plenty of Twitch streams, videos, audio. Never ever heard him claiming that him and Ed were the sole reasons for the Attitude Era's success. I've heard him talk about how he feels that he needs to be credited for his role in the success of that. Sure, absolutely, as he well should, because he was a major driving force of that. And people are now finally starting to admit that. So again, they're saying something that is based off of, if I had to take a guess and make a prediction, I would have to say they got that information from sources trying to sell an agenda or taking something out of context and putting their own spin on it. And also, too, without getting a hold of him to confirm those statements. Going on now to page 216, second paragraph. Talking about having too much going on in each. They're talking about having too much going on in each segment of the show, saying it's burning out the crowd, saying that the crowd looks like zombies staring into the ring. But the last couple of sentences are what's important in this paragraph. Russo had a plan to take care of that, however. No, it was not to book less stuff, but to eliminate the third hour of Nitro at the beginning of 2000, something he himself has confirmed was already in place before he was hired. That, again, is another inaccuracy, a mistruth. And this is page 216. And on to page 217. Second paragraph. They talk about their numbers, or the monthly averages of ratings, saying their first 3 shows averaged at 3.33. Despite the hype, not much had changed. It's 3 shows. It takes time. Apparently nobody paid attention to see how long it took the WWF to get from where they were to kicking Nitro's ass in the ratings. It took a good 2 to 3 years for that to happen. He was only on there for 3, and they're criticizing after 3 weeks. Moving on. Page 220. What's the note I wrote here? Yeah, we're on page 220. Okay, the note was for this entire paragraph. They're talking about is going over the segment on the October 28th Nitro where Billy Kidman came across Scotty Riggs and Buff Bagwell talking in the locker room, where they talk about the finish of the match. I'll go ahead and read the paragraph. Yes, they were in the... Bagwell, you're pinning me? 1, 2, 3. Riggs, that's the finish they gave me. Yes, they were in the midst of planning out their fake wrestling match. It gets better. During the match, Bagwell rolled him up with a small package and refused to let him go. The ref counted 2, paused, then grudgingly counted 3. Bagwell ran off laughing, having supposedly put one over on those evil riders from up north. Again, insider fans considered it a stupid fake angle, and casual fans had no idea what was happening, so there's ultimately no reason for doing it. Now, this goes back to if you guys would have done your job and actually talked to the people who were there, the people that you were attacking and accusing of these things. If you would have taken the time to interview Russo, he has actually said numerous times, and he would have told you this if you would have asked him, he was booking angles based on the reality of the wrestling business. He was trying to tell stories based on things that actually happened. He wasn't trying to appeal to the insider crowd. He was just trying to tell new and different stories based on the reality of the wrestling business. Moving on, still on page 220. Oh yeah, they're complaining about matches lasting less than a minute. You can say death at here's a sentence. But most of the matches, they're talking about the world title tournament after Fault that took place after Halloween Havoc and culminated at Mayhem. Most of the matches lasted about a minute. Death in any tournament that you're trying to make seem important. First round matches. If you have Sting against, say, Brian Knobbs, the match should not go more than 5 minutes because Sting, Brian Knobbs. Brian Knobbs should not be having a competitive match with Sting, despite what you marks want to see with good 5-star matches. Whoopee! Oh, I digress. Plus, weird things were happening going on to page 221, like guys advancing to the second round despite never actually having won a match in the first round. This is another thing that they happen to do in this book, is that they make these accusations while ignoring the storyline reason for these things happening. I don't remember off the top of my head what the storyline was, but I went back and watched those Nitros. It was covered why these things were happening. They weren't just happening out of the blue. This was covered. Moving on. Let's see, 1, 2, third paragraph. The November 8th Nitro was the exact opposite of the show the week before. This program was horrible on countless levels. Instead of 3 things happening in each of the 16 quarters, about 10 things happened in each, and none of it made any sense at all. Sid opened the show with a weird promo in which he informed everyone he was not as stupid as he looked. Medusa, a woman booked into a tournament for the men's heavyweight championship who had already been eliminated, was reinstated into the brackets and then eliminated again. See above with angles explaining why this happened. It doesn't just happen out of the blue. They covered this. Just because you didn't like it doesn't mean it didn't make sense. You just personally didn't like it. They covered it. It was written to where it made sense. You just didn't like it, so you want to make an excuse to why you didn't like it. Let's see. Probably the highlight of the booking insanity was Brian Knobbs beating Bam Bam Bigelow via countout in a Falls Count Anywhere match. Yes, the falls could count anywhere, even presumably in another universe, but somehow Bam Bam Bigelow got knocked out. He was fighting with Knobbs backstage and ran off to help Kimberly. The ref apparently decided that Bigelow wasn't there, he wasn't anywhere, so he counted to 10, and when Bigelow didn't return, he called for the bell. The guy, I don't remember how the angle played out, but if the guy's leaving the arena, what do you expect the ref to do? The match clearly cannot continue, so therefore it's got to get thrown out. I'm getting worked up just the ridiculousness of this, man. Ridiculous. Moving on to page 223. Second paragraph, and they talk about the WCW Mayhem pay-per-view, page 223 once again. The WCW Mayhem pay-per-view, which replaced the annual debacle known as World War III, drew 12,119 paid for the finals of the disaster known as the WCW US World Title Tournament. Yeah, if it was such a disaster, it drew $12,119. Yeah, that was a real disaster compared to today's WWE, where they're giving out free tickets and they can't even fill the first bowl. Consistently, anyway, that is. And because Russo's emphasis was on wacky angles instead of in-ring work, 4 of the matches, Evan Courageous versus and they give the examples, Evan Courageous versus Disco Inferno, Meng versus Lex Luger, Vampiro versus Berlin, and David Flair versus Kimberly, yes, Kimberly, were in the infamous negative star range, and 3, Bagwell versus Hennig, Scott Hall versus Booker T, and Goldberg versus Sid were only slightly better. They're actually using the Meltzer system to rate the quality of these matches, to say these matches sucked. They're using another person's opinion to judge the quality of these and pass it off as fact. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me with this stupidity? Oh, I'm getting a headache doing this. I might cut this short before my head explodes. Oh, jeez. All right, page 225. The entire first paragraph. Another inaccuracy that they get wrong is they're saying that this took place on the Nitro after Starrcade. The whole thing with Goldberg breaking the windows of the limo and having his arm sliced open, they're saying it took place at Nitro. It was actually that Thunder. It happened on Thunder, guys. Another small detail you couldn't be bothered to make sure you got right, so why should we believe you on the big important stuff when you make such ridiculous accusations? Alright, moving on to 2000. Page 229. Let's see here. A little on the halfway down paragraph. Ratings aside, business was hardly exploding under Russo. By the end of December 1999, Nitro was averaging a miserable 5,000 paid. Worse, the December 14th Thunder from Mobile, Alabama only drew 1,797. Despite what anyone claimed, clearly none of the Russos was over with the fans because merchandise sales, which had been as strong as $10 per head at the company's peak, were now in the $4 range. The buy rate for Starrcade, their biggest show of the year, came in at a dismal 0.3, which was especially pathetic since they had had over a month to build up the quest of their biggest star, Goldberg, towards the WCW title. Russo again insisted that turnaround was going to take time, which of course he had the evidence to confirm this, to prove this, the sources to confirm this. From his time at the WWF, he took over. He started writing at the WWF in the middle of March of 1997. They did not win a single ratings battle with Nitro till a year later. Alright, page 230. First paragraph. Last sentence. Talking about the World Tag Team Title Tournament, where the finals were David Flair and Crowbar defeating Nash and Scott Steiner in the finals. The finish saw Arn Anderson, now Funk's enforcer, hit Nash with a crowbar, leading to the pin. Afterwards, David attacked Arn, no doubt as a way to thank him for helping them to win the tag belts. And Nash and Steiner beat up Funk as well. Again, ignoring the story, the character development of David Flair as an unstable, out-of-his-mind individual who will snap and attack anyone at a moment's notice, friend or foe. Moving on, page 232. Now, remember what I said earlier, the comment they made about Tank Abbott, where they said he was a draw and believable as one of the baddest men on the planet. Last sentence of page 232, when they talk about Russo wanting to put the belt on Tank Abbott. Here's the last sentence of that paragraph. The real reason nobody would have predicted this is that nobody was quite stupid enough to think that WCW would make Tank Abbott the shoot fighter WCW hired last year. Here's the key part. They contradict themselves, who hadn't connected with the fans at all, the World Heavyweight Champion. So if he hadn't connected with the fans, how can you say that he remained a draw and believable as one of the baddest men on the planet? Which one is it, guys? Pick one. Next page, 233, where they talk about Russo leaving to be after when everything went down, where they wanted to be part of a committee. Let's see here. Bush told him that he could stay on as part of a booking committee with Kevin Sullivan, J.J. Dillon, and Terry Taylor, similar to the committees he worked under in the WWF. When he worked in the WWF, the people that were on the committee were him, Pritchard, Cornette, and McMahon, which was eventually whittled down to him, to Russo, Cornette, and McMahon. And then eventually it went down to Russo and McMahon, and then Ferrara was added, and it was that until they left. And that was from June 98 to October 99. Man. Alright. And here we go. Alright, and they talk about And then at the bottom of the page, leading into page 234, to finally settle any dispute about what Vince Russo accomplished in WCW, let's look at his run from a pure number standpoint. The final tally from day 1 to his departure in 2000 looked like this. Nitro ratings went from a 3.08 average to a 3.1, although it was realistically a 2.9 since the 3.1 was for the new 2-hour show, which were only what 2 or 3 shows that him and Ed wrote during that period. So you can't really, count that. Don't forget this also resulted in the loss of tons of ad revenue money since they deleted the 3rd hour. How is that his fault? It wasn't his call. Attendance fell from 46.28 per show to 35.93 due largely to the fact that the company had failed to create any new stars and had made their previous draws such as Ric Flair and Goldberg look like total idiots. Buy rates. The company's main revenue source plummeted from 0.52 to 0.26. That's not a typo. Buy rates actually dropped in half. Again, you cannot attribute these numbers solely to Russo. Those numbers were already in a downward trend. What he had to do was, and he was also in the process of tearing down what they had, cleaning up the mess, and then rebuilding. The cleanup, tear down process can take anywhere from 6 months to a year, and then you can start building. He was only on the job for 3 months. You cannot judge that off of 3 months. 6 months to a year of him unfiltered, unable to, and basically letting his vision come out in the 6 months to a year period without anything getting in the way. Okay, and then things are still going downward. Okay, then we can say that he wasn't working, but we don't. You can't. And speaking of ratings, I decided to do a little bit of research and math on my own. For the year 1999, the beginning of 1999, up through his departure in January of 2000, I broke down the Nitro ratings into 3-month averages. So let's take a look at those. The January 4th, 1999 through April 5th Nitros averaged a 4.52 rating. From April 12th through July 12th averaged 3.53. That's a 1-point drop off. From 7/19 through 10/11, the week before Russo started, average rating 3.23. So the drop off is still pretty, noteworthy. It's still a significant drop. 10/18 from when he started through 1/10/2000 when he went home, 3.21. And the last drop off, and last was 3.23. What that tells me is, in that 3 months, ratings-wise, as far as the ratings go, he managed to stop the bleeding. He managed to stabilize things, and there was a spot where they could have started building and going from there. When he sent home, when they scrapped everything that he did, it was game over. Moving on. We're into 2000 now. Page 250. In the little bold section, they talk about the March 27th Nitro and getting into the episode of the show, or the part of the show where I think they're doing an angle. Yeah, they're doing an angle throughout the show of a bounty on Hogan, which was answered by the Wall, and they did a segment where Hogan was in the ring and the Wall was on top of a building, and he was able to clearly identify the wall despite the fact he was, you know, I don't know how far away on top of a building. And they're basically trying to say how this is ridiculous, blah, 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 blah. However, like, how could he figure out it was a wall? This doesn't make any sense. Here's the thing, though. Throughout this thing, when Hogan's screaming, it's the wall, brother, Wall's music is playing over the PA system. So yeah, how do we know it was the Wall? His music was playing. You go back and watch it. It's on the network, guys. You would see that. Alright, 251, first paragraph. On April 3rd, the company ran a taped nitro designed to set up the return of Bischoff and Russo, who had obviously lied months back when he said his face would never be shown on TV. So they're accusing Russo of lying about something where, at the time, he probably wasn't planning on being on TV. He didn't want to give up that, and he said numerous times he didn't like giving up that tool in his tool bag of being able to be out in the crowd and gauge the crowd reaction from there. By putting his face on TV, he loses that tool, that advantage to be able to figure out who that better data to figure out who's getting over and who isn't. And they're making and then this is basically an assumption, an accusation without any evidence. And it's more of an opinion than anything. It's an accusation with nothing to back it up other than their own personal distaste for him. Continuing on, page 253. First paragraph, and they're talking about the April 10th show and the line where Eric Bischoff said something about Sid and scissors. This was, of course, in regard to the UK hotel room incident 10 years ago. Another error and inaccuracy, because that took place in 1993. This was 2000. 2000 minus 1993 is 7, not 10, guys. See, second middle paragraph. The problem, of course, was that 99% of wrestling fans did not scour the internet for wrestling news every day, and probably only 5% of them, at most, had even heard of the story. Russo, however, who had lived and died by the internet responses to the shows, actually he lived and died by the ratings because that was how he got paid. He didn't get paid based on what Dave Meltzer and his band of Mark Sheep said about the show. In fact, he said that if they hated the show, he took that as he was going in the right direction with it. And then page 255, first paragraph, talking about Mike Awesome. We're going to start off in the middle. Despite having lost the belt, Awesome was now one of the hottest topics in wrestling. Therefore, WCW brought him and gave him virtually nothing to do. He bounced around the mid-card portraying horrible characters such as that 70s guy in which he wore a leisure suit and the Fat Trick Thriller in which he made fat chicks swoon. Funny, because the first thing he did when he got there was attack Kevin Nash, and then he was involved in things with Steiner, Hogan, DDP. He was mixing it up with world champs and future world champs, getting the rub from them. I don't think that amounts to doing hardly anything. Page 257, towards the bottom. Bottom of the big paragraph. Bottom of the big paragraph on page 257. It's talking about the April 24th Nitro. And it wouldn't be complete without something like this. Sting went to a no contest with Vampiro in a first blood match. Yes, a no contest when blood fell from the ceiling and drenched Vamp. So, what's the ref supposed to do? A guy gets drenched in red liquid, therefore, there is now no way to be able to determine who is the winner, because if Vampiro were split open and bleeding, would it be him actually bleeding, or is it from the blood? You cannot determine a winner thanks to this interference, therefore the match must be thrown out. Logically, that's the logical step to take, is to throw the match out. But they don't want to think logically, they just think real world logic. They think, wrestling. They think just straight up wrestling bubble mentality. They don't think real world logic. Continuing on. Page 267, talking about middle paragraph, discussing the May 15th Nitro, building towards the Great American Bash. Let's see, with the following lineup. Oh, wait, they're talking about... Oh, this is... Okay, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. This paragraph, they're going over the Great American Bash card. Nitro on May 15th began to build towards the next big pay-per-view, Great American Bash, with the following lineup. Nash versus Jarrett for the world title. Rick versus David Flair, with the elder Flair having to retire if he lost. Hogan versus Kidman, with Hogan having to retire if he lost. Sting versus Vampiro in an Inferno match. Dallas Page versus Mike Awesome in an ambulance match. Wall versus Shane Douglas in a tables match. Lex Luger versus Chuck Palumbo in a Lex Flexor on a pole match. And Scott Steiner versus Tank Abbott in a fake shoot fight. As you can see, Mr. Russo was fond of stipulation matches. It's too bad he had no clue about the point of putting stipulation on a match. So he just added stipulations for the sake of stipulations. They never meant anything. Never mind the fact that Mike Awesome for the past couple of weeks had been putting people in ambulances. Never mind the fact that the Wall had been getting known for putting people through tables. Never mind that they had been doing a thing leading up to this with Vampiro trying to set people on fire. Just keep ignoring the storylines leading to these and explaining why these matches are taking place, authors. Alvarez Reynolds. Okay, moving on. And that was page 262, by the way. Page 264. Actually, 263. We're starting at the bottom of the last paragraph on page 263. They're talking about the May 29th Nitro, which I believe... Let's see. Yeah, that was the... Okay, I'm trying to figure out. Yeah, that was the Nitro after Nash won the belt from Jarrett in a three-way. But we're going to go to the bottom of the paragraph. Let's see here. So they showed footage of Rick's son David holding Reed and Beth Flair hostage. Reed and Beth Flair, as you might have deduced from reading their last names, were Rick's wife and son, and also, strangely, David's mom and brother. If you're wondering why David was holding them hostage, then you also wonder why, when Rick saw this, his first reaction was to give Jarrett that title shot he had asked for. Again, ignoring the story being told and everything that leads to this. David had basically rejected his family. He rejected his dad, he rejected his brother, and he rejected his stepmom. He basically did not, to them, in his mind, they were not his family. So he did not care about that, but again, you guys are trying to find reasons to take a shot at the writing because you can't make sense. Just because you can't make sense of it doesn't mean it doesn't make sense. Alright. Going on, page 267, bottom paragraph. Russo, apparently feeling that having Liz in the ring and Luger versus Palumbo was going to help turn the entire company around, said that if those two got away with refusing to do angles, the inmates would soon be running the asylum. That whole sentence is 100% an assumption. You are putting words in his mouth. It is inaccurate. You guys are full of it. 267, that's 267, bottom paragraph. Page 271, middle paragraph. Let's see, where are we on? Talking about the promo that Russo cut at Bash at the Beach. As confusing as that would have been, it likely would have worked had it not been for one thing. That little speech Russo gave, the one in which he called Hogan a big, bald son of a bitch. Originally, it was supposed to be a much shorter and much less vicious speech. After Russo was done, Hogan legitimately felt he'd been double-crossed, so when he stormed out of the building in anger, he was really storming out, and he really was angry. Now, again, if you would have talked to those people who were there, you would have known that the promo was not scripted and Hogan and Bischoff were not in the building when it was cut. 2 more inaccuracies. Bottom paragraph of same page 271. On Nitro the next night, to further ensure that no money was made from this, they barely mentioned anything had happened, and they gave absolutely no details about the Hogan versus Jarrett match, despite the fact that Tony Schiavone had said numerous times on the broadcast they wanted to talk about it, but were legally prevented from doing so. Again, inaccuracies and making assumptions, or trusting stooges who have their agenda telling you their version of the story with an agenda of their own to sell. 272, middle paragraph. Matt Williams was director of research for WCW. He spent a year of his life polling fans about what things they liked and disliked about the company and what they felt should be changed to make it a more enjoyable product. He polled not only the fans that were still watching, but also fans that had long ago given up on the product. The results were unsurprising. Fans wanted more wrestling and less sports entertainment. When Mr. Williams presented his findings to WCW, Russo had the entire study thrown out. He couldn't fathom the notion that wrestling fans were interested in gasp with serious wrestling. Williams, outraged, quit for a job in another Time Warner division. This is the only place I have ever seen that story being told. They provide no source, no proof, nothing to back this claim up at all, and until they do, it is 100% bullshit. 273, middle paragraph. Internally, there was another big management shakedown, and when the dust settled, Bischoff was relegated to being a consultant, and Brad Siegel had put all his faith behind Russo. This is a very controversial decision, since many in the company, unlike Siegel, actually had backgrounds in wrestling and saw Russo for the flop he was. So, what happened in the 9 months that in WCW, they're basically saying his entire career here was a flop, just because of the obstacles in his way, keeping him from getting what he needed to do done in WCW. Another assumption, and more stooge reports coming from people with their personal agendas to sell, not caring about the facts and the truth. And continue on. Page 288, middle paragraph. Talking about the later fall episodes of Nitro and Thunder. What was sad was that the shows weren't even that horrible. They were certainly better than the programs Russo had written at his most insane. Unfortunately, by killing off all the belts, the heavyweight title in particular, Russo had created an atmosphere in which everyone was fighting each other for really no good reason. Even beforehand, so the things people were blaming him for, the stupid title changes that people were blaming him for, were still occurring when he wasn't there. Finger poke of doom, the belt flipping twice in one night with Page dropping to Sting and Sting dropping it back to Page that night. Stuff like that. Or how about Randy Savage holding it for a day at a time? It's... Again, making assumptions. Printing stuff that stooges with agendas tell them without confirming the source. Assumptions and opinions printed as fact. Continuing on. And that was page 288, middle paragraph. Right now we're on to page 297. First sentence of the second paragraph. While Vince Russo had driven both buy rates and house show attendance in the toilet, many believe the Nitro and Thunder ratings were still okay. which were in the toilet long before he got there. The only thing that he did was fail to stop the train from going in that direction, and even then was not completely his fault. Did he make some mistakes? Sure. But to pin the blame solely on him is blind, backwards, and nonsensical. In fact, it makes about as much sense as the stuff that you claim he writes that doesn't make sense. Continuing on. And that's actually all I've got. Of course, I didn't go through the whole thing, as you saw, just that, because that is stuff that I can easily get that information for. Because I have heard the people that were there discuss it numerous times. That is all for this episode. I hope you guys enjoyed. I'll catch you guys later.